Good evening, dudes and dudettes. It's your boy here, Sugi JRPG, and finally I'm gonna be reviewing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and the review kinda got delayed because I got ended up in a hospital and had a bit of a high fever in the last couple of days, which prevented me from finishing and reviewing the game. But hey, better late than never. And the way I'm going to be constructing this review is, first I'm going to talk about the premise of the story and what exactly does the remake apply here. Is this a sequel, a spin-off, or prequel? What exactly are we talking about here? And then I want to go into pros and cons, and then on the very last segment we're going to be talking about the story with some spoilers. So let's get started. So first of all, I'm not a big fan of the name Final Fantasy VII Remake because the next games in the line are gonna be called like, I don't know, Final Fantasy VII Remake Episode 2. And that kind of sounds, well, kind of dumb in my opinion. Maybe they drop the remake altogether. Let's see what happens there. But definitely, this is an adaptation. So think it as the Peter Jackson's King Kong movie adapting the original King Kong movie, which was, by the way, like 1 hour and 40 minutes, while the Peter Jackson's movie was like 3 hours long. So in the same vein, it's adapting faithfully the source material and the key concepts of the story, but adding bunch of filler and extra stuff into the original piece. And I think that is the best analogy I can make when we compare Final Fantasy VII Remake, which adapts the Midgar section of the game, which was originally like 5 hours in the game, and this is more like up to 40 hours if you do all the side quests. I guess you could do a speed run on easy mode on 20 hours, maybe. But it is pretty much a full game though, and it kind of feels like it, even though certain parts of the game are a bit stalled, which I talk about a bit later on. And what is exactly the premise of the story? So in case you haven't played the original Final Fantasy VII game, our main character is called Cloud Strife. He is an ex-soldier. Soldier is this, well, a class of agents, and basically we're working for this electric company known as Shinra. There is no governments inside the game, at least not in the original game, and Shinra Electric Company is this massive global corporate that is operating most around the continent itself, and it's kind of like this sort of a capitalist end game where governments have withered away and companies are only ones that are kind of like running the show. I mean, a lot of the other capitalist and cyberpunk elements are not necessarily very present inside the game, outside from kind of portraying the low life and high-tech type of a thing. And basically, Cloud has become a mercenary now, and he's working for this group known as AVALANCHE, which is, well, terrorists or eco-terrorists. We could consider them as like the modern-day Antifa or something like that, which has different segments on it, and they are basically anti-Shinra, and they're doing a lot of terrorism against Shinra's plantations, and the game starts with them trying to blow one of these reactors in Midgar, which are kind of like fueling the ecosystem and keeping electricity on all this technology, basically. And, you know, that's kind of like the premise. And the leader of the Avalanche is called Barret. He is one of the main characters inside the game. Then you have the childhood friend of Cloud, Tifa, and then you have this mysterious girl known as Aerith. These are the four main characters that he will be playing through the game, and they will be going on and off from the party as the time goes on throughout the game. And basically, a lot of the story actually in the original game gets more like flushed out as more of the story goes on. In some of the Final Fantasy games in the past, you kind of like portray certain villains as the main villains, and then turns out that they're actually not the main villains and there's a bigger threat. So this is kind of what Final Fantasy VII is emulating a lot, actually, and they kind of changed some of these things in this remake version. So our favorite villain, Sephiroth, is making an appearance a bit earlier inside the game. And now we have kind of like broken down the premise of the story. There are probably better videos who will do a better rundown of it, basically. But so let's kind of go into the actual pros and cons now. So let's talk about the combat. So the combat is very similar to Final Fantasy XV, except it's polished, it's balanced, and there's variety between characters. Let's say Final Fantasy XV was more like a prototype of the active time combat and also the games throughout the Kingdom Hearts series, and I think for the first time Square has really hit the nail here. The combat is really good. it is balanced in the sense that you have like a blocking mechanism which you need to do. In Final Fantasy 15, for example, the blocking was useless, you didn't use it, it was irrelevant in terms of the actual combat, and it was a lot of button smashing. In this one, you can't really do that, you're not able to spam abilities as much, or mana, so you have to be a bit conservative with your mana usage and the active time bars. You have the limit bars coming back from the original game, so by hitting enemies and taking damage, you will be getting the limit bar back, and this will allow you to basically unleash this ultimate ability, and most of them are taken from the original game. I think there was also a new one for Cloud called the Ascension. I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the original game, but it's so long time since I've played it. So the combat is very fluid, very nice, nothing really negative to really say about it. It's fun because there's variety between the characters. Tifa is more like this super fast attack speed type of a character who's doing a lot of combos. Cloud is very balanced, high damage swordsman. Aerith is this ranged support mage, and basically Barret is this long range gun guy with, well, very tanky as well. So kind of have like clear roles here, and there are certain archetypes, but throughout the systems you're kind of able to break the mold bit of these archetypes. I personally like the archetypes model, which we kind of seen in games like 9, for example. I like that characters are tailored to be certain kind, and instead of just being like everybody can do everything, it's just not really smart for the story. But some people like that. I don't mind it. But so basically, there's also the system of staggering and pressure, and this is very familiar from Final Fantasy 13 and 15, but it's a lot better. So there are certain key points attacking from the rear, from behind, at certain times will attack, like boost the staggering rate, and once it starts staggering, they will basically take extra damage, and this is kind of like improved from the original games. They really balanced it out, and it feels like that is working like it should. Sometimes it can be a bit grindy to get into the staggering positions, which differ, by the way, based on the difficulty of playing, which I will talk about a bit later. But I kind of like this system. The combat has a lot of complexity in it, and has versatility in it, and there's many types of builds that you can use inside the game. Also, the economy inside the game is pretty nice. In this game, you definitely want to stack up a lot of potions, Phoenix Downs, buy new materia, buy new weapons. There's a lot of things where you can use your money inside the game, and it's also a bit scarce. You're not able to get it all the time. Although like our native ability of steal is not able to steal gil anymore. I think it could do in a lot of other games, but for some reason in this one you can't. And I really like this because the economy has to be sound, and you have to have way to basically spend gold and gil, way to spend gil and use it in different things. Then it comes to the materia system, which is almost one-to-one from the original game. You can do combinations where you can like get infused attacks or resistance based on the materia you're using, fire, blizzard, thunder, etc. A lot of other types of things like boosting your ATB bar or limit breaks and things like this. A lot of customization allowed here. There's also a new weapon upgrade system, so you get a lot of weapons inside the game. And this is kind of like working on the way that the weapons are something that you might want to swap around the game a lot, perhaps. And the games are scaling, so they have their own spear grid type of system, which will give you bonus stats such as attack damage, magic, mana, health, 10% damage increase on staggered opponents, or a recovery on killing enemies and things like this. And there's a lot of customizations on. So basically every item or every weapon is viable inside the game. They have different types of builds. Some are utilizing more on magic, some are more on damage, some are more in between, and then you have like these one-off like mass critical damage type of things. I did feel that some of these builds were definitely better than others, and I felt like stacking health was a pretty solid choice for the most part, and like doing, perhaps something like crit build wasn't really that efficient. At least I didn't feel it efficient. As for the soundtrack, it is pretty excellent. There's new tracks, remixes of the original ones, and enjoyable altogether. I did hear a lot of other songs and, adaptations out of the songs in some of the trailers. So I wish that some of those versions could have been played as well. I felt like some of the versions were not necessarily the best ones that Square had. But definitely, like, it's really hits you the feels. I think it's really capturing the original soundtrack. The elements are there. It's really well done. There's also 26 side missions inside the game. These are kind of random, but they are at least having a bit more story value than they did on Final Fantasy XV, and they usually focus around certain side characters inside the game, which may be relevant or less relevant characters. As for the graphics, I would say they were pretty good. The level design was really good. When we look at 15, I always had a problem with its level design. It felt very empty, blank, unstylistic, really lacked any type of flavor. And 7 really managed to capture the Midgar. For the most part, I don't think there were like any badly level design or reused assets or reskinned models. I felt like graphics were really well done. The lightings were really impressive. I was really impressed by the graphical demonstration of the game. The FPS was also pretty good, and it's a matter of time until we see the PC version, which is going to be looking even better. But let's now get into the actual negatives. So there's a lot of criticism for the game. I'm not a fanboy. I always do objective reviews. It's not about my feelings. It's about what is real and what is not. So the puzzles inside the game were absolutely bad and tedious. Some of the parts inside the game were just way too dragged out, like some section in this underground passway, like it was way too dragged. And the puzzles were not really fun to do, and let's be honest, puzzles are not really ever fun in JRPG games. Sometimes they can be, but mostly really annoying and tedious. And it just felt like the game engine and everything about it was not just really built up for do these type of puzzles, which would have been fun. I would have preferred to have more mini games, to be honest. But yes, puzzle parts were really bad. The camera had some small issues at times where it wouldn't necessarily giving you the right angle on the opponent and where the locations were. So you can tweak it a bit in the settings, which is good. But it kind of suffered from the same problems that 15 does. But because the level designs were pretty good and open, there was not really many places where the view was so to speak obstructed by the actual camera issues. But let's be honest, there were some small things about the camera which were not really good. As for the minigames inside the game, I don't think they were particularly good. And let's remember, this is the company that created the Blitzball minigame. Not all people liked it, but that was really one of the best highlights for 10 for me. It's the best minigame to this date. There was obviously the card games in 8 and 9, which were great too. And in this one we had the biking, which was okay, but not the minigame I would like to go play that times. I think it was really nice change of pace from the normal combat, and it didn't feel so tedious of doing boss battles. Basically, we have 2 biking missions in the whole game. We're probably going to be seeing some parts in the Gold Saucer, which is a city we'll be going into in later parts of this game series. But it was well done. I'm gonna give it that the biking was well done, but it was not necessarily a minigame that was this perfect and really fun to do. You couldn't really do it outside from the story missions. There was not a simulation for it, which in my opinion is kind of important for minigames. Then was darts, which you only pretty much do for the actual trophy and the item reward. The darts was, I got it on the 3rd try or something, get the high score basically. This was okayly done, but everything else about the smashing boxes thing is absolute trash. Don't come tell me that this was a great minigame. Most of the minigames inside the game are not very good. Then let's talk a bit about the NPCs, and it's a really weird thing because in the Midgar you have different sections. You have the slums, you have the kind of high city, and you then have the Shinra headquarters. So people wear different types of clothing. And at certain parts of the city, people were wearing too normal clothing, which you could have like depicted from your normal wear in today's world. And I felt that that was a bit of breaking my immersion to the game, because we have to understand this is a cyberpunk game. This is taking place in future where robots and synthetics and robot arms are a thing. So fashion has to be elevated into some level too. And I felt like, you know, it's just not really good to make the characters look way too normal. I think it's about fantasy. The game's name is Fantasy. To make it fantasy. And I think best way to brew fantasy is not adapting realism, which Final Fantasy series has been sadly doing too much as of late. And it also puts it out because the members of Avalanche or all the new characters that were added just have drastically different clothing from the rest of the people, and that doesn't really add up. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And obviously you don't want to create multiple art assets for all the characters and make them look unique, but I definitely think that, you know, you should have certain types of things, you know, which would like differentiate them at least from your modern day clothing. Also, this is something that I wanted to also mention, is that easy and normal difficulties are the ones that you choose from. Also, there's classic mode where the characters are attacking and blocking on automatically, where you just issue the ATB commands and summons and all that. And by the way, forgot to mention this. The summons actually this time are balanced around, because in 10, for example, and a bit in 12, I guess, too, the summons were way too broken. So I think there was a neat balance with the summons. So the easy and normal fluctuate too much. So in playing normal, some of the robot bosses like took 15 minutes to beat down. It was absolutely tedious and annoying to do. And that was really annoying for me because you couldn't change the difficulty middle of the game. You couldn't change your materia sets in middle of the game, because you would have robots inside the game which would like be weakness or vulnerable to thunder, and you needed thunder for that battle. So what you had to do is basically die or grind it out and try your luck, and then, you know, you would redo your materia settings. And this goes into a bit of another problem, because the party is changing so much. You have to constantly change who is the healer, who is the mage, who has the auto cure, who has the magic. And that's something that I kind of was annoyed by by the game, because I just drastically had to change that all the time. And that's why in some bosses I just ended up having no healer at all, and I had to like use items and stuff like that. And so I definitely feel like that was a bit of one of the downsides of the game. And going back to that difficulty stuff, so once you play the game through, you get hard difficulty, which I didn't even want to try, because even though I went to all side missions, and I did fair of side grinding as well, I still was getting my ass whipped by these normal mobs. And that was really, really annoying about the game. And when I swapped to easy, easy was way too easy. You just would smash the buttons basically, and that's it. So there was definitely some problems in certain parts of the game where the normal would increase the staggering way too much and increase the health of the bosses way too much, and they would become very tedious battles, 15 minutes long. So it's definitely a different game. If people played it on easy, I can see they said that this was a pretty fast-paced game and it was not tedious. But I gotta tell you, I played it through normal, 95% basically towards the end. I just have to go easy because I was so annoyed by these very long boss fights. The last robot fight that you play in Shinra headquarters took me very long, and it was a very tedious battle. And basically, that's pretty much my pros and cons of the game. Now I want to talk about a bit of the story. So, first of all, the story, as I already mentioned, it is the adaptation of the source material. It's not following everything one-to-one. So, this game, as it is only depicting the mid-card part, there are very much filler content inside the game. So you have not side missions, but missions that take place, I think it was chapter 3, which really didn't have any relevance to the actual story, outside from introducing this new character, Roche. And you just had these missions and dungeons which really didn't play much part into the story. And I don't think it's really, when it comes to creating a story, it's about you know, how well you use your time rather than how much you have it. So they decided, and they really wanted to prolong this game. As I talked earlier, some of these puzzles and dungeons were really tedious, overlong, and they didn't need to be that because they had very low story value. I would have rather had these segments and parts as these optional dungeons inside the game where I could grind. That's something that doesn't exist in the game, by the way, these grinding spots. You have to go to the Colosseum, basically, which pays gold, and you have to travel there. I think it was a bit inconvenient, so there was not really a good location to go into and kill some mobs and level up. So there's a lot of filler inside the game. We get to flush out a lot of the characters, especially the Avalanche. People are obviously big fans of Jesse, so am I. Even though I like this Jesse side story chapter, I think that it was overall kind of, you know, not important. It didn't need to be that long. And there was a lot of just way too much extra stuff, like when Aerith and Cloud walk away from the church. This took like, what, 10 minutes to jump through buildings or something? And pretty much nonsense dialogue there. So there's a lot of like this sort of a fan fiction right up in the story, which doesn't really have much to do with the overall plot. And my problem here is I would have used that story time much better. One of the things, for example, President Shinra, which is the assumed bad guy, the head of the company, the bad guy behind it all, you could have just built this guy up. Show, I don't know, Cloud walking the street and watching a documentary about him, how he raised to power or something like that. Or just show some scenes where it's just scheming and planning. We really didn't end up getting that much from the old game, different to the original game. We really didn't see him flesh out that much. And I think that was a huge mistake. I think a lot of that time which we spend on the Avalanche characters could have been used in a lot of the villains. Heidegger, Scarlet, a lot of these characters get pretty low screen time, I would argue, and I think there was a lot of opportunities to kind of build those enemies up, show more flashbacks, and just like build up a bit more the Shinra company, in my opinion. That should have been better. And instead they just wanted to do this very extreme filler fanfiction stuff, which I didn't feel was really that great. I mean, it's obviously fan service for some people, but I felt like also like the Avalanche, which is now changed into Splinter Cell of groups. Who is the HQ? Who is the boss of Avalanche HQ? They could have shown a silhouette in the game and like teased these bit of characters which are going to be appearing later on the game. As we already know from kind of thing, the Avalanche members really didn't die. And that means that in case they're going to be following more closely on the game as the next parts come out, the Avalanche members don't make appearances in the original game. Duh, because they're dead. So there are a lot of characters that make appearances later down the game. Reno and Rude, the Turks. Why didn't you spend time building this organization? Who was founder of the Turks? And show out some of the other members of the Turks a bit, like tease them a bit. Erika and maybe Cisne, we don't really know. Is she going to be making appearance? Oh, by the way, Crisis Core is no longer canon. I don't necessarily like too much because I would have liked to see Genesis and some other soldiers, but maybe they will be doing more soldiers in the latter parts. It's definitely open for discussion. But I definitely felt that this was not well used story time to build up some of these characters that are going to be shown later down the road. We've got Kate Sit appearing for like 5 seconds. And as for the new characters, we got a lot of new ones, such as Leslie and Kyrie. And these are actually the characters that are appearing on the novel. So, which was released, The Kids Are Not Okay, or The Kids Are Okay, which is a sequel novel. I think it takes place after The Advent Children or something like that. Maybe I will read it at some point and review it on the channel. And this novel does focus on Kyrie, which is the main character of it. Leslie also makes appearance. And maybe the main male character from that novel also makes appearance in the main game. And I thought that was a really nice retcon that nobody in other reviews actually have talked about so far. Yeah, and then it goes into the very last chapter where we go full-on Kingdom Hearts, and I didn't like it. I'm gonna be honest with you. Any types of concepts of story that revolve around time travel fortune telling of the future, the legacy and the destiny which must be fulfilled and cannot be changed. I absolutely detest that stuff. I absolutely hate it. I think it's one of the worst writing things that people do when they can't write. People do time travel and all this ridiculous shit, such as the future telling, when they're not good writers. And yes, there has been cases where time traveling has been done well. A series called Continuum comes into my mind, which did it. You know, I haven't watched the series fully, but the parts that I saw, it was really well done. But this last chapter is kind of like hinting that the story will be very different from the events after Midgard, so we may not even see these locations we saw in the other games. So is there going to be open world? Are we going to be able to fly with airships? We don't know. Are we going to be even seeing all the same characters? Is Vincent and Yuffie going to be playable? I hope they are. But yeah, that's kind of pretty much my thoughts about it. So I had a lot of feels, good and bad. It is definitely the best game in the Final Fantasy series since Final Fantasy X. So it's better than 13 and 15 in my opinion. But I actually like World of Final Fantasy more than I like this one. And that's a game that is having more of a special connection to me rather than the most of the Final Fantasy community. A lot of nostalgia fags are obviously talking about this game, and nostalgia is kind of like clouding their mind and being objective about the game. It's definitely worth the buy, and I would say like 8 out of 10, 8.5 maybe. The problem I had, as I said, kind of like the story. I felt that there was a lot of tedious stuff, and I wasn't too interested like playing the game on hard or doing a lot of the side missions. I didn't feel that... I feel that there should have been like an optional dungeon of sorts inside the game. If there's going to be DLC, I'm not going to probably buy it. And that's pretty much my rundown of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think this might be the best in the franchise. I think it can get really messy in terms of the story from now on, and that's what I'm worried about. And also subverting the story more. And these are just the only things I talked about. A lot of things that were changed. Characters were slightly different. Aerith didn't have those elf ears. I wish they would have added those. I don't think why they had to normalize her more. I think she looks really good, by the way, and the animation and her faces are really nice. But there are these small subversions of the game which I definitely didn't like, and I felt at times, you know, especially because we were kind of given the idea that we can explore Midgard. But the thing is, you don't actually explore all of the sections. Most of them you can't even return to. So you can only interact with basically 3 hubs inside the game, technically. But that's pretty much my rundown. Sorry for making it that long, but a lot of things to say, so fuck it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.